When we talk about the cerebrum, there are three basic regions. We've already talked about the lobes. We need to talk about the cerebral cortex. And remember, that's going to be that thin layer of gray matter that's quite superficial, the most superficial part of the cerebrum. There's white matter internally, and there will also be basal nuclei deep within the white matter. So there are a couple of ways that you can sort of slice or dice what the brain does, and we've already talked about the lobes, and now we're going to be talking about functional cortices. Again, the cortex itself is only about 2 to 4 millimeters deep. It is about 40% of the mass of the brain, and it is the site of your conscious mind. So your ability to be aware, your ability to perceive senses, your ability to initiate voluntary motor movement, your ability to communicate verbally and writing, memory storage, and understanding are all processed by the cortex. There are three types of functional areas, and we're going to go over them with specifics. Again, I wanted to remind you that white matter will be composed of myelinated axons, and gray matter is going to be composed of unmyelinated processes. This shows you what kind of plane? You got it, frontal plane, so you can see the white matter and you can see the cortex superficially on the cerebrum. And that's the cortex, all marked in green. So we will talk about the motor areas, sensory areas, and some of the association areas, some of each of those actually. Please remember that we are going to have what's known as decussation, which is a crossover of information, either at the level of the brain stem or spinal cord or within the brain itself. So each hemisphere is going to be concerned with the contralateral side of the body, which is why if you've ever known anyone to have a stroke on the right, the left-hand side of their body is affected and vice versa. We have lateralization of the cortical functions in the hemispheres. And please also remember this, that conscious behavior is going to involve the entire cortex in some way, shape, or form. No one area of the brain is responsible for an entire functionality, especially when it comes to conscious behavior. We're going to talk about the motor areas of the cerebral cortex. And those are some of the areas we're going to talk about. The frontal eye field is within and anterior to what's known as the premotor cortex. And that is going to be associated with, you shouldn't be surprised, vision. Primary motor cortex, somatomotor cortex, motor cortex, all the same thing, and it, again, resides within the precentral gyrus. It allows you to have conscious control over very precise and skilled skeletal muscle movements. We've already talked about the homunculi. There is a motor homunculi that is going to represent the contralateral motor innervation of body regions. This shows you the precentral gyrus versus the postcentral gyrus. We'll talk about the postcentral gyrus in the next section. And this shows you the homunculus, just as a quick reminder. Again, it is going to give you some idea of the proportion of the cortex that is responsible for or associated with processing information for various parts of the body. The premotor cortex is going to be involved with planning movements and it is sort of the staging area, the get ready area for skilled motor activities. It's going to help control your learned repetitions or pattern motor skills. It is going to coordinate simultaneous actions and or sequential actions, and it will control voluntary actions that are going to depend on sensory input. Broca's area, as soon as you hear Broca's area, it is motor for speech. If you are asked the function of Broca's area, all you need to do to write down is motor for speech. It is usually on the left side of the brain, on the left hemisphere. It is going to be the area that directs muscles of speech production. It is also going to play a role in how you can comprehend speech. So the other area that we're going to tie in, although this is not a motor area, here's Broca's right there. So it's going to be in the left hemisphere. It's almost always in the left hemisphere. Not always, but almost always within the frontal lobe. We need to talk about Wernicke's area in conjunction with Broca's area, even though this is not a motor area. So Wernicke's is an auditory association area, as well as a speech association area, both written and spoken. Its job is to help you recognize the spoken word, and that's where it's located. So when you hear Wernicke's, think language comprehension, think the production of language. The reason I bring this up in conjunction with Broca's is this. You can tell if someone has damage to either Wernicke's or Broca's depending on how they talk and what they say. Remember that Broca's is motor for speech. If you have a problem with Wernicke's, the person will have a hard time stringing words together and being understood. So the words that come out might be gibberish. Their enunciation will be fine because Broca's is not affected, but the ability to produce language, to speak in complete sentences and not sound like you're talking nonsense, is controlled by Wernicke's. If the person has a hard time enunciating their words, but can write them perfectly, then it is going to be Broca's that has damage and Wernicke's that is intact. And I think about this because there was a fellow who used to run around the Trumansburg area, and he would go past our house and he would stop and talk to the dogs. He always had dog cookies. The dogs loved him. And, we see him a lot, so we'd start to talk to him, and we were talking to him. And at one point he said, I'm having a hard time stringing words together. It's like I can't make my words make sense. And I thought, Wernicke's. He's had damage to Wernicke's. Haven't seen him for a while. I hope he's okay.